Breaking news tonight, the return of tot mom.
Feel that it's necessary, if I'm going to continue to operate appropriately as a legal advocate, that I start to advocate for myself and also advocate for my daughter.
Who would have thought that this woman, once labeled as America's most hated, would now call herself a legal expert, fighting for the very child she was accused of killing?
Not only were traces of chloroform found in the trunk of her car, but that her laptop computer showed she searched the internet.
For 31 days, she didn't report her daughter missing.
The jury find the defendant not guilty.
But I also couldn't exclude the possibility of it being an accident, so I can't find her guilty of a crime if I'm not sure a crime was committed.
14 years after being acquitted of her daughter's murder, Casey Anthony is back in the spotlight. But this time, she's playing a whole new role.
I feel that it's important that I use this platform that was thrust upon me and now look at as a blessing as opposed to the curse that it has been since 2008.
If you think she's innocent, drop a comment below. But make sure to come back after hearing the full story, because even Gypsy Rose Blanchard, who killed her own mom over abuse, doesn't think she's innocent. But before we talk about her latest move, let's go back, way back, to see how a seemingly ordinary young woman became the center of one of the most controversial murder trials in modern history.
Emergency. I called a little bit ago. The deputy sheriff saying I found out my granddaughter has been taken. She has been missing for a month. There's something wrong. I found my daughter's car today, and it smells like there's been a dead body in the damn car. Okay, what is the 3-year-old's name? Caylee.
This call started it all. It was the moment that would unravel the case of Caylee Anthony, the 2-year-old girl who vanished without a trace. But what made it even more disturbing was that her own mother, Casey Anthony, never reported her missing. Instead, for an entire month, she lived her life as if nothing had happened. Partying, hanging out with friends, and even getting a tattoo that read Bella Vita, meaning beautiful life. Meanwhile, Caylee was nowhere to be found. Eventually, Casey claimed that Caylee had been kidnapped by her nanny, Zanny the nanny. But as investigators dug deeper, they realized this so-called nanny didn't even exist. It was just one of the many lies Casey told throughout the investigation. So, what really happened? How did Caylee go missing? And more importantly, how did Casey walk free despite all the evidence pointing to her guilt? For starters, Casey Marie Anthony was born on March 16, 1986, in Warren, Ohio, to George and Cindy Anthony. She grew up in a middle-class home alongside her older brother, Lee Anthony, and from the outside looking in, her life seemed normal. Her father was a former police officer before working in security, while her mother was a home care nurse. But even as a child, Casey had a troubling pattern of lying. And we're not just talking about harmless little fibs. People who knew her recalled how she would lie for no apparent reason, even when the truth was obvious. If she was caught doing something, she'd deny it. If she was confronted with evidence, she'd spin a new story. It wasn't just deception. It was habitual dishonesty that would later become the backbone of the case against her. As Casey grew older, her lying escalated. In high school, she began distancing herself from her family, keeping them in the dark about her personal life. She was known to be social and outgoing, but she was also secretive. Her parents later admitted they had no idea who her real friends were, who she was dating, or what she was doing when she wasn't home. And then came one of the first major lies, her fake high school graduation. Now Casey let her parents believe she had enough credits to graduate high school. They planned a celebration for her, invited friends and family, and were ready to cheer her on. But there was just one problem. She hadn't actually graduated. She had failed to complete the necessary credits, but never told anyone until the last minute. Her parents were shocked, but this was only the beginning. Rather than finishing high school, Casey made a different choice. She dropped out altogether. Soon after, she claimed she had secured a job at Universal Studios, working at the Hard Rock Cafe. Every day, she would leave home as if heading to work, return in the evening, and casually discuss her supposed co-workers, customers, and experiences. She painted a picture of a young woman excited about her job, seemingly happy and independent. By January 2005, Casey's life took a seemingly positive turn when she met Jesse Grund, a young man she quickly fell in love with. To the outside world, things were looking up for her. She had a steady job, a new boyfriend, and appeared to be on a stable path. But later that year, at just 19 years old, Casey found out she was pregnant. This revelation threw her into a state of uncertainty. She confided in friends that she wasn't sure if she wanted to keep the baby. Adoption seemed like an option. She could continue living her carefree lifestyle without the responsibility of motherhood. However, months passed, and she kept the pregnancy a secret from her parents. It wasn't until she was 7 months pregnant that Casey could no longer hide the truth. Even then, she insisted she was considering adoption, but Cindy and George Anthony were outraged at the thought. They refused to let her give the baby up, insisting that their grandchild would be part of the family no matter what. With her parents unwilling to entertain the idea of adoption, Casey's fate as a mother was sealed. On August 9, 2005, Casey Anthony gave birth to a baby girl, Caylee Marie Anthony. From the moment she was born, Caylee became the light of the Anthony family's life, especially to Cindy, who took on a maternal role in raising her granddaughter. And this is where Casey would add even more lies to her life. Casey initially told Jesse Grund that he was the father, and he fully embraced the role, preparing to raise Caylee as his own. However, when a paternity test was later conducted, it turns out that Jesse was not the father. This left a major question mark over Caylee's true parentage. Over the years, Casey offered multiple versions of the story. She claimed at one point that the father had died in a car accident, but there was never any confirmation of such a person existing. Some speculated that the father could have been a former boyfriend, or even someone unknown to Casey's closest friends and family. Despite the mystery surrounding Caylee's biological father, Cindy and George never pressed Casey for the truth. Their focus was on Caylee herself, and in their eyes, she was part of the family, regardless of who her father was. Many people who later followed Casey's case weren't as concerned about who the father was, but rather why she constantly lied about it. She seemed incapable of telling the truth about even the simplest details, making it difficult for anyone to trust a word that came out of her mouth. One of the strangest decisions the Anthony family made during this time was keeping Casey's pregnancy a secret, even from her own brother, Lee. Lee, who lived in the same house, had no idea his sister was expecting until just a few days before she gave birth. When he finally learned the truth, he was furious. He couldn't understand why his parents had kept such a major life event from him, especially when he and Casey had always been relatively close. The betrayal ran so deep that he refused to go to the hospital when Casey delivered Caylee. Now, as a new mother, Casey also introduced a nanny into the picture, Zanny, whose full name she claimed was Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez. According to Casey, Zanny was an ex-girlfriend of a man named Jeff, an IT worker from Universal Studios, and Jeff had even been the one to pay for Caylee's child care. Casey's parents, Cindy and George, found this arrangement bizarre. Why would a stranger be covering the cost of babysitting their granddaughter? But despite their concerns, they never actually met Zanny. Cindy would later recall that Caylee did talk about Zanny and her dog, which seemed to add some credibility to the story. But something wasn't right. No one in the family had ever seen Zanny, met her, or even knew where she lived. To them, she was just a name, a ghostly figure that only Casey seemed to know. And soon, suspicions would grow even stronger. During this time, Jesse Grund, the man Casey had claimed was Caylee's father, was ready to commit fully to their little family. He proposed to Casey, and she accepted, seemingly eager to embrace this new chapter in her life. As mentioned earlier, a DNA test revealed that Jesse was not Caylee's biological father. But despite the painful revelation, Jesse still wanted to be there for Caylee and work things out with Casey. He had grown attached to the little girl and was ready to raise her as his own. However, by May 2006, Jesse began noticing troubling changes in Casey's behavior. She had become distant, erratic, and dishonest. She wasn't the same person he had fallen in love with, and he could no longer ignore the red flags. Feeling confused and frustrated, Jesse ended their engagement. But rather than grieving the end of her relationship, Casey quickly embraced the party scene. She started going out more, drinking, dancing, and spending nights at clubs, all while her parents took care of Caylee at home. Cindy and George provided their granddaughter with everything she needed: food, clothing, and a stable environment, while Casey appeared more focused on having fun than being a responsible mother. During one of her nights out, Casey met Tony Lazaro, an aspiring DJ. The two began dating almost immediately, and Casey started spending more and more time at Tony's apartment, which he shared with roommates. Sometimes she even brought Caylee along. Despite having a new boyfriend and a seemingly fresh start, Casey still lived at home with her parents, who remained the primary caregivers for Caylee. In many ways, Cindy and George were more like Caylee's parents than Casey was. They were the ones who made sure she was fed, clothed, and taken care of. However, on June 15, 2008, a heated argument erupted within the family. The following morning, Casey left with Caylee for what she claimed was a work trip to Tampa, Florida. She packed a bag as if she intended to stay away for a while. But surprise, this was just one of her lies because, as it turns out, she never went to Tampa at all. Instead, she spent the next few weeks partying, staying with her boyfriend, and living as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, Caylee was nowhere to be seen, and every time someone asked about her, Casey had a different excuse. Cindy frequently called to check on Caylee, only to receive evasive responses such as, "She's with the nanny, Zanny," or "She's sleeping." As the weeks passed, Caylee's grandparents grew deeply concerned. During this time, Casey's began partying more than ever, drinking almost every night and even participating in a sexy body contest at a local club. Since her boyfriend was a DJ, she followed him wherever he performed. MySpace was popular at the time, and Casey posted pictures of herself out partying, dancing on bar tops, and seemingly living her best life. She even got a tattoo that read Bella Vita, meaning beautiful life. On top of that, Casey's parents had lent her their car since she did not have one of her own. They wanted to ensure she had transportation, believing she needed it for work. However, one day Casey drove to a check-cashing place and ran out of gas, leaving her stranded. Instead of calling for help or asking her parents for assistance, she abandoned the car in the parking lot. Eventually, employees at the check-cashing business noticed the vehicle sitting there for an extended period and called a tow truck. The car was impounded, and the authorities contacted Casey's father, George, informing him that the family's vehicle had been towed. Confused and frustrated, George went to retrieve the car, only to be met with an overwhelming and sickening odor when he opened the door. The tow lot employee accompanying him immediately remarked that the stench resembled that of a decomposing body. Though George had never encountered such a smell before, he instinctively knew something was terribly wrong. George brought the car home, still disturbed by the awful odor. When his wife, Cindy, smelled it, she too was alarmed. The couple opened the trunk and discovered a trash bag inside, but instead of inspecting its contents, they threw it away and attempted to mask the lingering stench by spraying an entire bottle of Febreze inside the car and leaving the doors open to air it out. Because of these, they were furious. Not only had Casey abandoned the vehicle, forcing them to pay to retrieve it, but she had also remained silent about it. They had so many unanswered questions. Why had she left the car there? How had she been getting around? And most importantly, where was Caylee? Desperate for answers, Cindy tried calling Casey multiple times, but her daughter refused to pick up. Left with no other choice, Cindy drove to Casey's boyfriend's apartment to confront her directly. When she arrived, she was met with an unsettling scene. Drug paraphernalia scattered throughout the living room, despite it being early in the day. Cindy demanded to know where Caylee was, but Casey simply repeated that she was with the nanny, Zanny. Frustrated and fed up, Cindy insisted that Casey come home with her immediately. Casey, irritated and embarrassed by her mother's sudden intrusion, especially in front of her boyfriend, reluctantly agreed. Back at the family home, Cindy reached her breaking point. She called 911 and reported Casey for stealing the car and abandoning it. But what she said next sent chills down the dispatcher's spine. Cindy also reported that her 3-year-old granddaughter had been missing for a month. And as Cindy waited for the police to arrive, she overheard Casey talking to her brother, Lee. Casey claimed she had met the nanny at a park to drop off Caylee, but when she arrived, Zanny allegedly grabbed the child, refused to return her, and disappeared. Horrified by what she was hearing, Cindy called 911 again, this time to report a possible kidnapping. In the second call, she frantically told the dispatcher that she had just learned her granddaughter had been taken and had been missing for an entire month. But it was the third 911 call that truly conveyed the gravity of the situation.
911, what's your emergency? I called a little bit ago, the deputy sheriff. I found out my granddaughter has been taken. She has been missing for a month. We're talking about a 3-year-old little girl. My daughter finally admitted that the baby's in the store. I need to find her. Your daughter admitted that the baby is where? But the babysitter took her a month ago. My daughter's been looking for her. I told you my daughter was missing for a month. I just found her today, but I can't find my granddaughter. And she just admitted to me that she's been trying to find her herself. There's something wrong. I found my daughter's car today, and it smells like there's been a dead body in the damn car.
Okay, what is the 3-year-old's name?
Caylee, Caylee, Anthony.
Caylee Anthony?
Yes.
How long has she been missing for?
I have not seen her since the 7th of June.
Is your daughter there?
Yes.
Can I speak with her?
Okay, Sheriff's Department, they want to talk to you. Answer the question. Hello?
Hello?
Yes.
Can you tell me what's going on a little bit?
I'm sorry?
Can you tell me a little bit what's going on?
My daughter's been missing for the last 31 days.
And you know who has her?
I know who has her. I've tried to contact her. I actually received a phone call today, now from a number that is no longer in service. I did get to speak to my daughter for about a minute.
Who has her? Do you have a name?
When officers arrived at the Anthony home, they pressed Casey for information. She claimed she knew exactly who had Caylee, the nanny, Zenaida Fernandez-Gonzalez. Casey stated that Zanny had been Caylee's babysitter for months, was a former co-worker from Universal Studios, and was a mix of black and Puerto Rican. The police requested that Casey take them to the last place she saw Zanny. She led them to the Sawgrass Apartments, pointing out an apartment where she claimed Zanny had lived. But when officers checked with the apartment management, they discovered that no one had lived in that unit since March. Suspicions deepened when surveillance footage failed to show any sign of the so-called nanny. By this point, investigators were certain that Casey Anthony was lying. So determined to expose the truth, police started digging into her claims. One of the first major red flags was Casey's supposed job at Universal Studios. She had repeatedly told friends, family, and now law enforcement that she worked there. But when police checked, they found out the shocking truth. Casey had never worked at Universal Studios. In reality, she had been fired long ago but kept up the charade, telling everyone she still had a job. But rather than confronting her outright, the detectives played along. They took Casey to Universal Studios and asked her to lead them to her boss. Without hesitation, she confidently walked through security into the employee entrance and into the office area as if she knew exactly where she was going. But as they wandered through the maze of offices, it became clear she was stalling, leading them in circles with nowhere to go. With Casey's credibility in shambles, police arrested her on July 16, 2008, and charged her with child neglect, obstruction of justice, and making false statements. Meanwhile, her mother, Cindy Anthony, sat down with detectives and dropped another bombshell. She revealed that when she had retrieved Casey's abandoned car from the impound lot, it reeked of death. Inside the trunk, she found trash, a rotting pizza box filled with maggots, and a stench so overwhelming that she initially thought something, or someone, had died inside. But instead of admitting the obvious, Cindy tried to dismiss it, insisting that the smell was just rotting pizza. However, detectives weren't buying it. They reminded her that on her own 911 call, she had explicitly stated, "It smells like a dead body." Yet she kept backtracking, desperately trying to cling to the idea that it was just decomposing food. To settle the matter, forensic investigators searched Casey's car. They brought in cadaver dogs, trained to detect the scent of human decomposition. When the dogs reached the trunk, they went absolutely crazy, signaling that they had picked up the undeniable scent of a dead body. Further inspection revealed a small stain on the trunk liner, one eerily the size of a small body. Investigators removed the trunk carpet for testing, and the results were evidence of human decomposition and an alarmingly high level of chloroform, a substance that can be used to render someone unconscious. And there was more. Inside the trunk, forensic experts found a single hair. Through mitochondrial DNA testing, they determined that the hair belonged to someone in the Anthony family, either Cindy, Casey, or Caylee. But there was one crucial clue that sealed the deal. The hair was long, untreated, and had something known as a decomposition band, a dark marking that forms on hair when a person's body begins to decompose. Given the characteristics of the hair, it could only belong to Caylee. But Casey's lies didn't stop there. Investigators seized the family's home computer, hoping to uncover more evidence. And what they found was jaw-dropping. Someone had searched how to make chloroform. This wasn't just some random internet click. It was a direct, deliberate search. When detectives confronted Cindy about it, she came up with yet another bizarre excuse. She claimed she had been researching chlorophyll because her dogs had been eating bamboo and she wanted to see if it was toxic. And then came the final nail in the coffin. Cindy wasn't even home when the search was made. It was proven that Casey was the only person at the house when the computer was used to look up chloroform. So why was Cindy going out of her way to cover for her daughter? Investigators believed she knew more than she was letting on. But whether it was out of denial, guilt, or misplaced loyalty, she wasn't giving Casey up. In a desperate attempt to get more answers, Cindy went to visit Casey in jail. She asked her straight up what Zanny looked like. After all, Casey had told everyone that Zanny the nanny had kidnapped Caylee. But as it turns out, Zanny the nanny never existed. The woman Casey had blamed for Caylee's disappearance was a complete fabrication. Yes, there was a real Zenaida Gonzalez, an innocent woman who happened to share the name, but Casey had never met her. The whole story was a smokescreen, another one of Casey's carefully crafted deceptions.
This cold-blooded callous monster who doesn't care and doesn't want to help because she's afraid that something so heinous happened that everyone's going to look at her and say, she's a monster, she deserves to go away, she deserves to never see the light of day, this bad thing should happen to her. I don't want to believe that right now, but you're giving me no choice. You understand you're giving me no choice. This is going to be the opportunity that you have right now, no matter how heinous you think that what happened was to Caylee, this is your opportunity to tell us. This is going to be your only opportunity to tell us. Because what's going to happen, we're going to find out. There's not going to be a question, we're going to find out. Okay? We've got so many resources on this right now, just like I told you would happen, that what we're trying to do is prove your story, but everything that we've done is disproven your story. Every single thing. Everything you've told us, we've shown you have lied about it. Casey has lied about it, and we're looking for your child. We got to throw these lies out, okay? All these lies are out. We know that everything you told us is a lie. Tell us what happened to Caylee. Tell us what happened to Caylee.
I dropped off Caylee. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. 911. And that's the last time that I've seen her. I dropped her
Where
off.
did you drop her off?
I dropped her off at that apartment.
No, you didn't.
That's exactly where I dropped her off.
And who'd you drop her off to?
With Zenaida.
No, you didn't.
She's the last person.
No, that's not true.
Did Zenaida give you any money that day?
No. I would not have sold my daughter. If I wanted to really just get rid of her, I would have left her with my parents and I would have left. I would have moved out. I would have given my mom custody.
On December 11, 2008, less than a mile from the Anthony family home, a utility worker named Roy Kronk was out doing his routine rounds when he noticed something unusual in the woods. About 20 feet off the road, he spotted what appeared to be a small skull. At first, he thought it was just another piece of trash, but when he poked it with a stick, he realized it was something far more sinister: a child's skull. He immediately called 911. Shockingly, this wasn't the first time Kronk had tried to report this discovery. He had actually called the police 3 times before, months earlier, saying that something in the area looked suspicious. But his calls were dismissed, and no one took him seriously. This time, when law enforcement arrived, they found more than just a skull. Scattered around the area were the remains of a small child, bones placed inside a trash bag, and next to them, a laundry bag. What stood out the most was a baby blanket decorated with Winnie the Pooh and Piglet, a haunting clue that would later tie everything back to the Anthony household. On December 19, 2008, DNA results confirmed what everyone had feared. The remains belonged to Caylee Anthony. The little girl who had been reported missing in July had been just minutes away from home the entire time. Investigators immediately obtained a warrant to search the Anthony home, and what they found further incriminated Casey. Inside the house, they found an identical laundry bag, sold only in pairs, meaning the one found with Caylee's remains had undoubtedly come from the Anthony home. They also discovered that Caylee's bedroom had been Winnie the Pooh themed, perfectly matching the blanket found with her body. With this damning evidence, prosecutors built their case, and Casey Anthony was formally charged with first-degree murder, along with aggravated child abuse, aggravated manslaughter of a child, and 4 counts of lying to law enforcement. Prosecutors announced they would be seeking the death penalty, believing Casey had intentionally killed her daughter. By the time the trial began on May 24, 2011, the nation was watching. Jose Baez, Casey's defense attorney, threw a shocking curveball in his opening statement. He claimed that Caylee had not been murdered at all. Instead, he argued that Caylee had accidentally drowned in the family pool on June 16, 2008, and that Casey's father, George Anthony, helped cover it up. Baez even accused George of sexually abusing Casey, claiming that years of trauma had shaped her into a compulsive liar. The defense's theory? Casey never killed Caylee. She was simply conditioned to lie because of her abusive upbringing. The prosecution, however, painted a very different picture. They argued that Casey had murdered her daughter because she wanted to be free from motherhood. They presented photos of Casey partying, drinking, and entering hot body contests in the days following Caylee's disappearance, showing no signs of distress. They also emphasized the duct tape found on Caylee's skull, suggesting that Caylee had been suffocated deliberately. But without a clear cause of death, the case rested heavily on circumstantial evidence. Throughout the trial, the jury heard testimony from forensic experts, Casey's former friends, and her own family. George Anthony denied all allegations of sexual abuse and insisted he had nothing to do with Caylee's death. Casey's former best friend testified that Casey had never even mentioned Caylee being missing, acting as if nothing had happened. Jailhouse phone calls between Casey and her parents were played, and Casey's cold, detached attitude made her look even more suspicious. When it came time for closing arguments, prosecutors urged the jury to see the truth, that Casey had killed Caylee so she could live a carefree life. They called her a pathological liar who fabricated elaborate stories instead of reporting her daughter missing. The defense, on the other hand, reminded the jury that there was no direct evidence of murder, no fingerprints, no eyewitnesses, no clear cause of death. Then, on July 5, 2011, after just 10 hours of deliberation, the jury reached their verdict. The entire country held its breath as the decision was read.
As to the charge of aggravated child abuse, verdict as to count 2. We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty. So say we all. Dated at Orlando, Orange County, Florida, this 5th day of July, 2011, signed foreperson. As to the charge of aggravated manslaughter of a child, verdict as to count 3. We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty. So say we all. Dated at Orlando, Orange County, Florida, this 5th day of July, 2011, signed foreperson. As to the charge of providing false information to a law enforcement officer, verdict as to count 4. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of providing false information to a law enforcement officer as charged in the indictment. So say we all. Dated Orlando, Orange County, Florida, this 5th day of July, 2011, signed foreperson.
The decision was read. The verdict shocked the nation. Many believed Caylee had gotten away with murder, while others argued that the prosecution had failed to prove how Caylee died. But one thing was certain. Caylee Anthony had become one of the most hated women in America. On July 17, 2011, Caylee walked out of jail a free woman, having already served time for her false statements to police. But freedom came at a cost. She would never escape the public's wrath. Crowds screamed at her, calling her a murderer. Protesters lined the streets, demanding justice for Caylee. Now, if you think Caylee Anthony would be out there, depressed, drowning in guilt, or tormented by public outrage, think again. Despite the world labeling her as a murderer, despite the loss of her child, she didn't shed a single tear of distress in public. She moved on as if nothing had happened. In March 2017, Caylee gave her first interview since the trial to the Associated Press. In a series of articles, she admitted to lying to the police and acknowledged the public's hatred toward her. But understanding doesn't mean she cared, because if anything, Caylee seemed perfectly fine living with the infamy. By December 2020, Caylee was making moves again, this time filing paperwork to start her own private investigation business in South Florida. Her family claimed the business was meant to investigate Caylee's death, but a source told People magazine that wasn't the case. That's a closed chapter in her life, the source revealed. She's not starting a company to get answers about Caylee. In other words, she wasn't looking for justice. She was looking for profit. Then, in November 2022, Caylee reemerged for a televised tell-all starring in the Peacock docuseries Caylee Anthony, Where the Truth Lies. In this 3-part special, she made bombshell accusations, including blaming her father, George Anthony, for Caylee's death.
The only person in this world that matters to me still is my daughter. But I'm still defending the fact that I didn't hurt her.
The new documentary is also generating headlines like this. Caylee Anthony blames her father for daughter Caylee's death. When contacted today by Inside Edition, George said, "I am in contact with an attorney. That's all I can say at this moment." He was tight-lipped when photographers approached him today.
Do you have any comment about your daughter's allegations? George, have you got anything to say?
While Caylee painted herself as a victim of her father's abuse, George and Cindy Anthony weren't staying silent. In January 2024, they appeared on an A&E true crime reality show where they took lie detector tests while recounting Caylee's tragic disappearance. In one clip, George denied knowing where Caylee was during the 6 months she was missing. In another, Cindy made a shocking admission, saying she believes Caylee 100% knows what happened. Then, as if the Caylee Anthony saga wasn't over, she resurfaced yet again in 2025. This time, on TikTok. In March, she posted her first video to promote her new Substack page, claiming to be a legal advocate and researcher. In the 3-minute clip, Caylee attempted to reintroduce herself to the public.
I feel that it's necessary, if I'm going to continue to operate appropriately as a legal advocate, that I start to advocate for myself. and also advocate for my daughter.
And just like that, Caylee Anthony was back in the public eye, not as a grieving mother, not as a woman seeking justice, but as someone reinventing herself once again. From lies to trials to documentaries to social media influencer, the Caylee Anthony story never truly ended. It just keeps evolving. But no matter how many times she tries to rewrite her own narrative, one thing remains unchanged. A child is gone, and no one has been held accountable. The public still cries out for justice, the rage never truly faded, and the ghost of Caylee Anthony still lingers over this entire case. Even the jurors who reached the not guilty verdict weren't safe from the wrath of the people. They received so many death threats that their identities were kept hidden. And now, years later, as Caylee continues to live her life, free, unbothered, and rebranding herself yet again, one question remains. Will justice ever come? Or is Caylee Anthony just another forgotten victim in a system that failed her? We can only hope that one day the truth will finally prevail and justice, real justice, will come at last. If you like the way we create these videos and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.